Frank for GNAT-TV. As many of you in the audience know, for a number of years, my show has been about prominent people, famous people, leaders, who are involved with the state of Vermont, and you really don't know about them. You really don't know who they are. And I'm thrilled to have with us today someone who fits that profile. It's a privilege to have him with us. He is on the faculty for 15 years at Bennington College, and his name is Mike Bisio. Mike, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Danny.
And Mike, as you could see, is a jazz bassist. He is world famous, very prominent with the double bass. And Mike, correct me, number 36 in the world, I think, right?
Yes, well,
explain that ranking.
Well, I didn't even know about this, but there was a voting on the All About Jazz site for living jazz bassists. And out of all the jazz bassists in the world, which even a small number would be 200,000, 200 made that list, and I was number 36.
Number 36 here in the state of Vermont at Bennington College. We're privileged to have Mike Bisio with us. And Mike, I also know that you are a Colstein performance artist.
I am.
Can you explain for our viewers the distinction of that?
Well, it's a very great honor. Barry, I've known Barry for, I don't know, maybe 25 years now.
Barry Colstein.
Barry Colstein, yes, I'm sorry, yeah. And he's taken care of all my instruments forever, and his kindness is only matched by his genius. I mean, he's an incredible person, and he's kind, and he's smart, and he does really wonderful work. This bass happens to be one he built for me in 2021. It's based on a Carcasi model. Carcasi was an 18th century Italian maker. And this bass, I've always coveted. This shape is a little different than most. It kind of looks like a bass a cherub would play. Not that I'm a cherub, but there you have it. And it's just a beautiful instrument. And he not only made it for me, he made it in memory of his father, Samuel Colstein, who was also a great luthier.
The founder of Colstein. I think
yes.
They're 80 years old. The company is 80 years old.
Yeah. And
this year.
They've championed bassists throughout their entire 80-year history, and a lot of great bassists, including probably the most famous one, Scott LaFaro, and I'm honored to be in that company.
And this instrument really is a work of art and craftsmanship, right? I mean,
yeah.
Putting a bass together, right?
Yeah, I mean, if I had to do it all over again, I probably would be a luthier, because you get to be by yourself a lot.
and before we started our show, you were telling me about another bass that you had, a different type of bass, different model.
Most of my life I played an Italian bass also from the 18th century. My first teacher was Dave Cobb. He was a legend here in the Northeast. And he found this bass for me in a furniture store in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And it spent 2 years in a shop. And then from the time I was 18 till 2021, which I guess is about 47 years, that was my main instrument. In 2019, I had open heart surgery, and for some reason, I don't know if they're connected or not, but at that point, I wasn't feeling that instrument anymore. So I called Barry, of course, and I told him this story. I said, I want to come in and play bass. He said, oh, you're nuts. So I said, okay, and I waited another year, and I still felt the same way. So I called him again. He said, okay, come on in. I played a bunch of basses, and there was a Boozy Hawks bass from about 1900 that I was really attracted to, and we were really close to making a deal, and suddenly I said, wait a minute, do you have any Carcasis that you're making? And he said, well, I don't have any now, but I'm starting one. and I'll tell you what, you take the Boozy Hawks, and I'll give you right of first refusal once the Carcassi's done. So I don't know, 6 months later, he calls me up and says, the Carcassi's done, come on in. And in my mind all this time I'm saying, oh, I got to get them both, I got to get them both. I didn't know how I would, but it was on my mind. And so I went in and I played this bass and I fell in love with it. And eventually we worked out a deal where I could have them both. So now I have two great instruments. I don't really look at basses anymore. I also have a Colstein travel bass, which is a really sweet little instrument, and the neck comes off it, and it's small. But so I am a Colstein bassist.
So these two basses that you mentioned, the Carcassi and the
Boozy Hawks.
Boozy Hawk, what is the difference? What is the difference between the two? Is there a difference in performance? What?
No, I mean, there really isn't. Some people might say, oh, that bass is, set up for jazz or classical. But for me, it's always been the instrument's an acoustic instrument, and that's how I play it. The Boozy Hawks is a really big instrument, and I'm not, I have some girth, but I'm not tall. As you can see, I basically play bass on the ground. But for some reason, I could play that bass, and it just resonated with me as this bass does. It's always a matter of what you want compared to what you can afford, and sometimes, like Barry and Manny were willing to make a deal with me. So that's a beautiful thing, and it got me to where I am now.
So what I'm hearing about a passionate, dedicated jazz bassist like yourself, or any bassist, you actually have a relationship with the instrument, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's like having another appendage. That's what you hope for. It's like you have to know it. There's I think this is 41 7/8 string length, which goes from the nut to the bridge. And that's you have to know every inch of it.
You spend a lot of time with it, right?
I do spend a lot of time with it, yeah. Not everybody continues to practice at my age, but I do. I love to practice, and I would do it more if they gave me more time.
So even one of the top-ranked jazz bassists in the world, and you still practice every day?
I do because I love it. We were talking earlier, and I know people who don't practice, and they still sound great. They don't have to. I feel like if I go a week without practicing, I've lost something.
Practice represents diligence and dedication, right?
Yeah. Yep. And sometimes, even in the business sense, the other thing about being me or anyone like me is you're self-employed. And so sometimes you're working really hard at business, but then I notice the more I practice, the more the phone rings. So there's that relationship also, which I can't really explain. But I've always known that if I keep at it, the phone's going to ring and somebody's going to want me to play.
Well, you have dates. You've played all over the country. Yeah. I think all over the world even, right?
Yeah.
And you have recordings out, records,
yep.
Right?
Yeah, I'm on over 130 recordings now, and I've played everywhere except Asia, but there's some plans for Korea right now. There's a recording with the Matthew Shipp Quartet. This month. We're in April, so this month. And then there'll be a Northeast tour with a great cornet player, Kurt Knufke. So, yeah, things happen, and it's just I have to keep it all on my phone because I'm really good in the moment because my memory isn't that good.
Oh. We're talking with Mike Bisio, who is on the faculty of Bennington College and is ranked as one of the world's greatest double bass jazz players. And Mike, could you give us a little sample here?
Sure, I'd love to.
Mike Bisio, again ranked as one of the top jazz double bassists in the world and a Colstein performance artist. Mike, a little bio here. How did you get started with this? Where did you go to school? What?
Well, my brother, I grew up in Troy, New York, actually.
Okay.
And my brother was the local Hendrix clone. And when I was about 16, he needed a bass player. So they bought me a bass, and he told me where to put my fingers. But I really liked the function of the instrument. So in my high school, which Troy High just had bands by then, but I walked in one day. I don't really know why. I think I was bringing a message. And there was a bass tacked up on the wall. And I said to the teacher, "Can I play that?" And he said, "Sure." I took it down. I couldn't do anything with it. And he said, "Well, you know, there's this man, Dave Cobb." And he put me in touch with Dave Cobb. Dave Cobb had about 30 students at the time. Very inspirational man. And I think a lot of my drive in the beginning, I mean, I can't tell you how many hours I used to practice. Many. But I think a lot of my drive in the beginning was to please him because I wanted him to like me, which is not a great reason, except it worked. And then, like I said, he found this bass for me in Pittsfield, but he would come get me on weekends, and we'd drive through Vermont and Massachusetts and upstate New York, and he knew how to find basses. And the first year I played, I was in with him on buying about 30 basses, so we got all his students' basses. And it was just very inspirational. And eventually he said, in about 2 years, he said, "Well, it's time for you to go study with Henry." And that was Henry Portnoy, who was at the time principal bass in BSO. So I went up and played for Henry, and he kind of begrudgingly accepted me. But he kind of scared me also. And that summer I had a scholarship to Chautauqua Institute, which is deep western New York State. And there I studied with James Harnett, who was the principal bass of Seattle Symphony. And I really loved him, and he was every bit, to me, as good as Henry. So I moved to Seattle to study with him, and I ended up staying for 30 years. And during that time, I had the good fortune of having Buddy Catlett as a neighbor for about 15 of those years. Now, Buddy played for Louis Armstrong, he played for Count Basie, he played for just about anybody you can imagine. And he kind of took me under his wing also, and we would play. He'd drive by, see me in the window, and stop, and we'd play two basses all afternoon.
Now, before the show, we were talking about bass players who play classical music and then other bass players who play jazz. And usually they stay separate and apart, right? They don't. You started out as a classical player, correct?
Yes, I did, and I actually had some very good contracts, but I don't know how clear I was about it in the beginning, but I started late, and I found at that time it was, I think it's different now, but at that time I just found that the classical people wanted me around because I could wiggle my fingers appropriately, but on breaks I was always by myself, and I never really understood it. Then, I don't know, at one point I realized it was them, not me. So I put all that aside, and I have always played improvised music as well. So I just substituted that, and for a while I played with really bad singers, but I gave that up eventually too.
But the jazz play, you obviously have more freedom, right, as a player?
Yeah,
performer?
I think in this music, the point is to find your own voice. You know, you have to know the history, of course, and you have to love the history to be able to do it. But you have to find your own voice. And a classical player, especially the bass, probably 95% of classical bassists are going to be in an orchestra. And that's, you know, you really have to sublimate yourself to the section leader and, of course, the conductor. So it's a much different headspace. Now, a lot of bass players think they do both, but at what level, I don't know.
We're talking to Mike Bisio, who again is on the faculty at Bennington College. And with the bass instrument, you started out with bass. It wasn't violin making the transition to the bass or starting out with piano, because from what I gather, many students start out with one instrument and they transition to one or two more, right?
That's true. There's a big, there's actually a pretty long history of, you first mentioned violinists becoming bass players, and then probably second most are guitar players who become bass players. But no, yeah, I always just played the bass, so it's how I understand things, and it's how I can channel greater powers. You know, to me, music is a healing force, and you have to be able to, I have to feel that to be able to share it. I really feel, you know, music is a very intimate thing, and you have to, you know, to borrow a phrase from a very old commercial, you have to reach out and touch someone. You have to touch as many people as you can, and they have to be allowed in as well. And the bass does that for me. You know, I guess from time to time I've messed around with other instruments, but I never really got the same feeling from it.
What is a selection that you have the greatest affinity for, a musical selection?
A musical selection? Whoa, I really love anything Mingus does or has done. And probably, I guess, my first thought about that was Don Cherry's Complete Communion, which is a suite. And I have the good fortune now of playing with the great Carl Berger, who, a wonderful vibraphonist and pianist who turned 88 last Friday, and he and Don Cherry were very close, and they played a lot of music all over the world together.
So you've been playing with them?
I'm not with Don Cherry.
Yeah.
Don's dead, but Carl is still alive. Yeah. In fact, on the 16th of April, we'll be playing at the Lace Mill in Kingston, New York.
And what is something in your very accomplished career that you still haven't done yet that you would like to do? There's got to be something.
Well, I'd really like to go to Asia a lot, and I would really like to, I get to do a fair amount of solo performances, but I think I'm reaching an age and a level, and as you know, I've kind of isolated myself, where I think my solo performance has a lot to offer, and so I would really like to push that more. Although I love, you know, there's nothing wrong with ensembles. I love to play ensembles. I love to function. I just feel like it's time for me to deliver what I can deliver best.
So playing the bass for the audience, I would imagine, especially with solo, it's something you have to acquire a taste for, so to speak, right? And like maybe a quality scotch or what you acquire a taste for bass music.
I think there's certainly some of that. I would hope that it has something universal. You know, we talked about me practicing. I practice in a very boring fashion, but I do that so when I'm able to play, I can just let it go. And I think there's something, if you don't come in with a preconceived notion of what music is, of what jazz is, then, and if you're not looking to talk to your neighbor and tap your foot on 2 and 4, I think everybody likes it. I have a story. My father, who just passed away last August, he would always ask me to play for him whenever I was around. And so I would play a standard, thinking that's what he wants. And one day I was real tired, and he said, "Mike, play something." I said, "Ah." So I improvised. I flat out, free as the wind. And then after that, he'd just say, "Mike, play that free stuff for me." And the last thing I ever played for my father, I sat him in his chair, and he was just a couple of weeks from passing, and I had just gotten this C extension, and I sat him in a chair, and I went, for about 10 minutes. And it was the first time I'd seen him smile in a month, and he says, "I feel it, Mike, I feel it." And so that's a great memory for me. That's a good way to say goodbye.
Mike Bisio, one of the top-ranked jazz bassist players in the world. And is there a website, Mike?
Well, there is. There's michaelbisio.com, except it hasn't been updated since pre-COVID. I think the best way to follow me is on my Facebook page.
Okay.
And it's just, it's just Facebook, yeah.
Mike, could we close our show with would you gift us with another sample of your music?
Of course. I was just thinking, when I played that C, this is one other of my heroes who I neglected to mention is Henry Grimes. And Henry Grimes was a very interesting bass player and beautiful soul who in 1969 disappeared. And I actually have read 2 obituaries about him, and they found him in 1999. And then he went on to have a good career for about 20 years. But this is off his very first record as a leader. It's called For Django.
And thank you for being our guest.
Thank you,
Danny Frank, another edition on GNAT-TV.
Thank you.